All right, so build update number 2 on Robert's Mr. Green 4runner. So as you can see, we've got the coilovers and bypasses on. However, I'll get to it in a little bit. We're going to be changing those upper shock mounts. We did get the sway bar on. We do need to pull some things apart and get some stuff welded up in here. We haven't put the bushing on and just the sides on for now. We also had a little bit of a boo-boo there. We were drooping things out to put the shocks back on yesterday, and as we had it all drooped out and stuff, we didn't really pay attention, but the sway bar inverted, and as we went to compress it again, we fucked up. So we got to get a couple more Heims so that way we clean that up. But overall, it cycles really well. There's plenty of clearance here. These shock mounts, as I said, we're going to be pushing it forward, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. The axle is basically completely assembled. Got to get the axles pulled off so we don't melt the seals as I'm welding in the lower brackets. Let's see, we got basically everything done on the axle. I got the upper shock mount or link mounts done. We built the links yesterday, so those upper links are good. Still need to get a little bit more hardware. The local hardware store they didn't have everything in stock. So we got the 1/2-inch bolts that have the proper shank length. So there's no threads on the actual metal. So we're good there. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we need to burn in, like these sway bar tabs. Need to do that. Basically almost all the tubing we got to get burnt in. It was really windy yesterday, so we couldn't do that. Some things that we have done, I don't know if it's on the latest update, but we did do the body mounts. We use basically the stock rear body mount bushings, but they're the energy suspension, I think it was, or I don't know which ones we used, but we used 2 different brands actually. So I think these ones might be the Sorensen steel ones, and I think these ones up there are going to be, or are the poly energy suspension ones. So not 100% sure, but that's what we're using. Let's see, front end, nothing in the front end is different, but as you guys saw, this is the MCM 3.5 over long travel kit. Yeah, it's rusted. I don't know why things rust more when it sits rather than when it's driving, but nothing new here. This is going to be probably something that's going to be upgraded in the future, just because there's going to be a hell of a lot more travel in the rear than it was before, and probably going to need more travel to keep up. So this side, basically the same thing. We don't have the sway bar on. We took it off. We still need to put the bushings in, but we're going to get everything welded before we push those bushings in, because they're super tight, and we want to be able to get them out if we have to weld. So last thing that we did on the last video is I think we just had the links mocked up. We did change the positioning of these lower link mounts a little bit, just because when we initially tacked them on, we had them a little bit too high, so we pushed them down a little bit. But our goal was to get as much triangulation out of the lowers as possible. So he's not a super wide width on this axle. I think his wheel mounting surface is somewhere around 66 or so. So we wanted to get these lowers kicked out as much as possible, and in order to do that, to clear the tire just barely clears by about 2 inches or so. So it gives us a little bit of room for deflection on the tire when they're air down and stuff. But we really wanted to get as much triangulation as possible. And as you guys can see, we got a decent amount of triangulation in there. That's why we had to narrow the frame, was to make room for these coilovers and bypasses with no issues, especially when it droops down and this side swings down, or either side swings down, as these shocks want to get closer, and he's probably going to upgrade to bigger shocks sometime in the future. But we had to get some things narrowed to get our geometry where we wanted. Let's see where we're at now. Let me go ahead and drop this down, and we can show you guys from the inside. All right, so as you guys can see, here is basically full bump right now. We're going to be just a little bit under the axle frame. We're going to be doing some bump stop pads right here, and then the limit straps are going to be off of here somewhere. So we'll get that dialed in. Hopefully next, we're going to be probably something like 21 or 20-inch limit straps, maybe a little bit more. We'll have to figure that out. As of right now, you can see I talked about we're going to be changing the upper shock mounts, and this is the reason. So a couple different things as to what we're doing here. So first, we have a lot of shock shaft left from where we're at. We push these down a little bit to get a little bit better geometry where we wanted, and a little bit more vertical separation from the top to the bottom bolts. That way it helps prevent twisting, because when you have your spring on your your coilover, all that motion ratio here, it's putting a lot of pressure this way, and it wants to twist the axle when you're putting a lot of pressure. So the more vertical separation, you notice like these trophy trucks and stuff, they're having this hanging underneath the axle. That way that load is pulling straight down on the axle rather than wanting to twist it. So we want to get a little bit more separation. It's still going to be a lot of load on here, but we should be good. And if something fucks up, we know what to change, but I think we're fine. I've seen a lot worse, so I think we're good. Now, in regards to this, so we have a little bit more shock shaft length, so we're going to be pushing the upper mounts down about 1 inch. And then also, if you look at full bump, see how the shocks are kind of kicked back just a tad. So what we're going to be doing is we're kicking these forward is about 3¼ inches. So that way at full bump, you can see, barely see, so you can see the line between the pivot points. We want the shocks to be basically 90 degrees at full bump. That way you have the best motion ratio, and the way your shock moves is going to be the most efficient at full bump, and then it's basically least efficient at full droop. But that's what you want. You want your bump zone to really focus on being a bump zone. So that's what we're doing here. These turned out pretty good, but we're kind of retarded, and we took the initial estimates of our measurements and never went back and actually measured the accuracy of those. So like they say, measure twice, cut once. Well, we didn't do that. There's been plenty of learning things that we've had to work on with this, but we've learned a lot, and we're doing pretty well, I would say, for being a couple of garage fabricator guys and people that don't do this for a living, that just enjoy doing it for fun. So we got some more hardware yesterday. We need to cut these guys down. We got those upper link hardware, so that way the shanks, the big idea was to make sure that the shank length was accurate, so that way we're not putting threads digging into the metal and prematurely wearing things out. All right, so here is our full droop. Pinion angle is looking good. That's something that we actually forgot to do yesterday, was measure the drive shaft. He's running a 1350 lower joint, and he's just going to be running the stock upper part of the drive shaft. He's just going to have to get a custom, at least this is what my expectation is just a custom end of it to be able to be a 1350, and then the rest is just going to be stock Toyota stuff with the double cardan. The way we set up the geometry is that the drive shaft is, or the yoke, pinion, whatever you want to call it, the pinion is always pointing at the transfer case full cycle. So that way it's very consistent, and we can use a double cardan joint. So hopefully a double cardan should be able to hold up to what we're doing. If you're doing things with a single cardan, then you would want the output shaft of the transfer case to be at the same direction as here. But with such a short drive line, I think this is going to be a better option overall. So as you can see, what we're estimating right now is around 23 inches of travel bumped and strapped. We're going to, as I talked about, putting the shocks down like another inch. So that way by the time it's bumped, maybe like half an inch or so below the frame rail, and then strapped and stuff to protect the shocks, about 23 inches or so. So maybe a little bit less, but 22, 23 inches should be more than enough for this vehicle. Here's the fuel cell mounts, sway bar. See, the sway bar angles are still looking really good with what we need, and they look great at full bump as well. So yeah, this pretty much sums it all up. We're getting to the end of my stage of this build. We still obviously need to plumb the fuel cell, which I'm not doing myself. He's having someone else do it. And then all the sheet metal, there's a lot of sheet metal work that needs to be done. I'm not doing that. I don't have time for it. And I'm also not going to be doing the cage work either. Someone else is going to be doing that work. But we're nearing the end of my stage of the build. There's a lot of little stuff that we got to put together, but we're going to make this a roller by the time I'm done with it.